Our next panelist is somebody I think most of you will know. Neil MacGregor, welcome. Has studied philosophy, law, and art history in Paris, Edinburgh, London, and Oxford. He taught art history and architecture at the University of Reading and was the editor of the Burlington magazine in London until 1987. Subsequently, he served as the director of the National Gallery in London, and after that, I think that is where most of us will know him from. From 2002, he presided over the British Museum in London in the role of director. And in that time, he presented, among other things, the series A History of the World in 100 Objects, which was accompanied by the BBC radio series and the book that has become widely discussed and a role model for similar projects all over the world. In 2014, he curated the exhibition Germany, Memories of a Nation, which was also on view in the Martin Gropius-Bau. In 2015, he was appointed head of the steering committee of the Humboldt Forum. He has received numerous awards as an art historian, and most recently he was awarded the Friedrich Gundolf Prize, as well as the German National Prize and the Goethe Medal in 2015. His very recent exhibition, and that's what we might talk about today as well, it was called Extremes, Nature, Culture, and the Humboldt Current, which was shown from November last year until May of this year at the Humboldt Box as a kind of pre-story to the Humboldt Forum exhibitions, and it brought together objects from the Ethnologisches Museum, the Museum für Naturkunde, and the Humboldt-Universität in Berlin. Welcome, Neil MacGregor.
Thank you very much indeed for that very friendly introduction. The title of this session was this was a brief romance or a long relationship between art and nature inside in the museum. I want to argue very briefly today that it's a very, very long-running love affair, and that the artist can do something that is not really possible to the scholar or the museum person in two particular dimensions. And I want to start, because of course Humboldt rather dominates my life at the moment, with this illustration from the Cosmos. Very briefly, to remind you that Alexander von Humboldt goes to South America in the late 1790s. What he's really interested in is looking at where plants grow and in what conditions, at what height they grow, at what level of humidity, and at what air pressure you find certain plants. He sets off with an enormous number of measuring instruments. He spends his entire inheritance on those, barometers, thermometers, wind measurements, and all the rest of it. Large numbers of unfortunate South Americans have to carry these for him. And he becomes a legend as he climbs Chimborazo. Not quite to the top, but further than, nobody knew it wasn't quite to the top. And he becomes a legend. What he does here is, I think, a completely new way of presenting scientific information through an artistic medium. This is, I think, the beginning of infographics. You can see, I hope, in general, on the large screen, how it works, that on the right-hand, on the left-hand side, you go down by the elevation, the height, and the names of all the plants that can be found at any particular height are then listed on the side, but they're also listed in detail on the cross-section of the mountain. It's an extraordinarily clever way of allowing very complex amount of information to be made immediately graspable. And it could only be done, I think, by a man who was not just a great scientist, but a very gifted visual artist. And what I want to argue today is really that what is important in the museum is not the work of art so much as an autonomous work of art, but allowing the museum to do something that otherwise it can't do. In this case, to transmit to a huge public very complex information where you can immediately see how this fits together, and that how plants and a particular environment are related. He became a great legend not just in Europe, but of course in America as well. And to such an extent that American artists from very early on were influenced by the Cosmos illustrations and by his writings about American landscape. He is, in fact, I think it's fair to say, the man who discovers the landscape of America as something that is in itself admirable and beautiful. And so the American artist Frederick Church, in the 1830s, 1840s, decides very unusually that he will not, like most American artists, come to London or to Paris to see what is happening in the old centers. Instead, he decides he will follow Humboldt to South America. And he goes on Humboldt's footsteps, he stays in the hotels that Humboldt stayed in, and he then makes drawings. And he produces what becomes one of the most famous pictures in America, his picture, The Heart of the Andes. This is the original frame, and it can be seen like this today in the Metropolitan Museum. It is, as you can see, a statement. It's Church's statement, his homage to Humboldt. He obviously, as you can see, I think from here, he was very influenced by Ruskin, very influenced by Turner. But what he is really doing is turning Humboldt's scientific discoveries into an artistic medium. This picture was exhibited as a one-picture show in New York in 1859. It was by far the most successful one-picture show ever in the United States. People queued around the block to pay 25 cents to see it. And everybody in the back, on the left at the back, you can see Chimborazo. And botanists can identify almost every leaf and every flower that's included. It is, of course, to us, perhaps a fairly conventional notion of the sublime. What was extraordinary at the time was that it was an American landscape being treated as a heroic model for the sublime. This, I think, is what only an artist can do. The Church took Humboldt's words. When Humboldt said that you needed to feel what was miraculous about nature as well as to understand it, and provided the one aspect that I think no scientific work can convey, and which is very hard for a museum to convey, which is the sense of wonder. And that wonder was what overwhelmed people. The scale is enormous. When you sit in front of it, spend time in front of it, you do feel you are very much in it as a tiny person, part of this enormous structure of nature. And this wonder developed in Church and in his viewers a great movement towards not just the visiting and the painting of American landscape, but also its protection. Church became the commissioner for Central Park. So if you've ever felt in Central Park that somehow there was a whiff of the Andes in the way it was arranged, this is why. Much more important, he was very significant, and the public that saw this was very significant in the setting up of a movement for national parks. This picture lies at the very beginning of the movement in the United States for the national parks. Without this picture, it would be ridiculous to say no Yosemite, but for the purpose of polemics in this conversation, let's say it. And this is why I think artists are so important. They can turn the discoveries of scientists and the display of scientists into the basis of political action. And that is critical. How do you get your public not just to think differently, but to act differently as a society, and to set up structures and organizations that will change the way society thinks and acts and the world is managed? Only artists, I think, can give this sense of wonder that will really lead to a permanent change in our understanding. And it's not just in areas like botany, like geology, which is what Humboldt is principally concerned about, and the fragility of the environment. It's also about objects here. This is shown in 1859. In 1868, in Philadelphia, another enormous innovation takes place. For the first time ever, a dinosaur is re-erected, an imagined dinosaur. You all know, of course, what they look like now, but it's important to recollect that this had never been done before. There is, of course, no complete dinosaur skeleton. What you're looking at is a work of art. This is an artist intervention in an artist's imagination from a tiny number of real dinosaur bones into what you see in front of you. If presenting Greek or Roman antiquities, we dared present an object with so little original elements in it, it would be scandalous. And we all know that there are endless scientific debates about how accurate or inaccurate these are. That doesn't matter. This is why every child in the world now wants to have the Stegosaurus as a soft toy. And it began in Philadelphia in 1868. The Natural History in London, which you see here, followed it in the 1880s, and Berlin in 1909. And these are, I would argue, great works of art, works by very, very powerful artists, who again changed the way the world thinks. They generated an extraordinary enthusiasm for paleontology. They made it central for people to know what happened, what was going on in the extinction of these animals. And of course, that has allowed the funding to follow, which generates the science today. And we have downstairs another example of what is surely a great artistic intervention in Tristan. Again, disconcertingly few parts of Tristan are as old as they might seem, and he's staged in a very powerful way. And it is, of course, exactly that kind of artistic intervention that I think we still need to generate the wonder that allows new research, the museum's displays, really to change the world. Thank you.